A group of men with rifles and pitchforks moves through a wheat field, hoping they aren't too late to save the girls. An old man wakes up. His name is Paul Edgecombe, and although he lives in a nursing home, he remains lucid and independent. After washing up, he asks for only
2 pieces of dry toast extra, thanks.
One of the orderlies notices that Paul plans to sneak out for a hike in the mountains, even though it's not allowed, but promises to keep quiet and only tells Paul to be careful. Paul goes out and finds his way to an abandoned cabin in the woods. Later, back at the home, everyone is watching a classic movie called Top Hat on TV. As Paul watches, something affects him deeply. He becomes emotional and starts to cry. His old friend Elaine sits beside him and comforts him. The two talk about how memories can fall upon you out of nowhere. 60 years earlier, Paul had worked in a prison during the Great Depression. Jobs were scarce, and he held onto his position tightly. He was the head guard in the death row block known as the Last Mile. It was also called the Green Mile because of the color of the floor tiles. They had an electric chair there, and the guards called it Old Sparky. The year that stood out most was 1935. That was when Paul contracted a painful bladder infection. His colleagues Brutal and Dean suggested he take a day off, but Paul refused. He had to be there. A new inmate was about to arrive. Soon, a van pulls up to the prison entrance. The rookie guard Percy and the experienced officer Harry escort the prisoner. The man they bring in is enormous. He is so tall that he makes even Brutal, who is a fairly large guy, look small. Percy, on the other hand, is an irritable and arrogant little man who annoys the entire team. Paul greets the barefoot giant and asks if he plans to cause trouble.
I'm not going to have any trouble with you, big boy.
The man looks like he could tear the entire staff apart without breaking a sweat, but instead, he only seems nervous and scared. The prisoner quietly calls Paul,
"Yes, boss,"
and enters the cell without a fight. Paul orders Percy to leave the block, but the rookie guard resists until the other guards yell at him. The entire awkward scene is noticed by one of the other inmates, Dell, who chuckles. Percy doesn't like being laughed at and breaks Dell's fingers with his baton. Once Percy is finally gone, Paul orders the shackles to be removed from the new prisoner. It is clear the man has a mental disability. He can barely write his own name. He says he is
like to drink, only not spelled the same.
The giant timidly asks if they leave the lights on at night. It turns out he is afraid of the dark. Luckily for him, the hallway lights stay on all night. He approaches Paul wanting to shake his hand. The guards tense up, worried he might crush him, but Paul feels there is no danger. Before letting go, Coffee says something strange.
I tried to take it back, but it was too late.
Paul asks for the new prisoner's file. Harry tells him the crime was horrific. 2 little sisters had been kidnapped from their home in a small town. The father and the rest of the villagers ran after the kidnapper and found John Coffey sitting on the ground, holding the broken bodies of the 2 girls. He was screaming and crying as if he had suddenly realized what he had done. The father almost killed Coffey on the spot, but the others stopped him. The official report on the injuries shocks Paul. While he is reading it, Warden Hal Moores appears. Paul asks about Hal's wife. Melinda has been suffering from terrible headaches. As for work, they have a big task ahead. Preparing the next execution of a prisoner named Bitterbuck. Paul must also be careful with Percy. The guy is related to the governor, which means they can't just fire him. But Percy is already eyeing a transfer to a psychiatric hospital. It's obvious he is fascinated by psychopaths. Paul deduces that Percy could have transferred a long time ago, but is only staying to see an execution up close. If seeing someone die is what it takes to get rid of Percy, the guards are more than ready to put on the show and say goodbye to him. At home, Paul lies awake, tortured by insomnia. He cannot understand how God could allow someone like Coffey to commit such a crime. His wife tries to comfort him and invites him to bed, but Paul rejects her, blaming his infection. The next day at the prison, something unusual happens. A mouse walks right down the middle of the hallway, completely without fear. Brutal throws him some food, and the little guy runs toward the padded cell used for violent inmates, which is currently just a cluttered storage room full of junk. The guards turn the place upside down but don't find the mouse. Then, out of nowhere, he returns as if nothing had happened. Percy sees him and loses his temper, trying to stomp on the mouse, but again, the little animal scurries away. The other guards hear the commotion and come running. They decide to let Percy tire himself out searching, just to spite him. He spends hours carrying boxes with zero results. Finally, they scold him for making too much noise. "We don't scare them more than necessary, Percy." They explain that the guard's job is to keep things calm, as these men on death row are mentally fragile. Too much pressure, and they could explode or hurt themselves or others. Percy doesn't listen. He insults the inmates and his fellow guards. Brutal grabs him by the neck, and Paul has to intervene. Everyone knows Percy could pull strings and get people fired, but Paul has had enough. He tells Percy directly that they are ready to lose their jobs if he crosses the line again, and that next time, no one will stop him. Later, they take Bitterbuck to say goodbye to his wife and daughter. Meanwhile, the guards rehearse for the execution. An old janitor plays the prisoner. As they strap him to the electric chair, he tells dirty jokes the whole time. The guards can't help but laugh. Dark humor is the only thing that keeps them sane. Paul, being in charge, scolds them, but even he understands. No smiles are allowed during the official execution. Percy watches everything with a sickly interest. Before putting the hood with the electrodes on the prisoner's head, they place a wet sponge underneath. That helps the current pass faster, making death quicker and more humane. Later that night, they shave the top of Bitterbuck's head for better conductivity. Paul sits with him for a final conversation. The man says he believes that if someone truly repents for their sins, they can relive the happiest moment of their life after death. For him, it was a camping trip with his wife, just the two of them, sitting by the fire in the mountains, with her beautiful body glowing in the light. They were only 18, talking all night until the sun came up. Paul says softly that he believes it too, and maybe that is heaven. Still, Bitterbuck is terrified of the execution. Paul does his best to calm him down. That night, they strap him to the electric chair, with witnesses watching behind the glass. One of the guards announces the procedure. "Electricity will pass through your body until you die. May God have mercy on your soul." Brutal pulls the switch. The room fills with terrible screams. When the doctor checks his pulse, the man is still alive. A second shock finishes the job silently. Afterward, Percy can't contain himself. Brutal pushes him away and takes the body out. Later, Paul talks to Percy about his final transfer off death row, but Percy is not satisfied. He doesn't just want to see the next execution, he wants to lead it. Paul, hesitating, agrees. The next day, the little mouse appears again. This time, he goes straight into Dell's cell. The inmate falls instantly in love and calls him Mr. Jingles. It turns out the mouse is quite smart. He even follows orders and rolls a spool of thread like a circus trick. Even Percy seems somewhat impressed. He offers the mouse an empty cigar box to be his home. Later, Hal arrives with news for Paul. A new prisoner named William Wharton, known as Wild Bill, is coming. He has done all sorts of horrible things. His death sentence is for murdering 3 people, including a pregnant woman. Then Hal breaks down. He's not just upset about work. His wife, Melinda, has been diagnosed with a massive brain tumor, and there is no hope. Hal doesn't even know how to tell her. That night, Paul can't sleep. The pain in his groin is getting worse, and he plans to see a doctor. But first they have to bring in Wild Bill. In the morning, Dean, Harry, and Percy go to pick him up from the psychiatric unit. The drugs make Bill look like a zombie, but as soon as they bring him to the mile, Wild Bill stops acting. He headbutts Percy and throws a chain around Dean's neck. Paul tries to help, but gets hit between the legs and collapses in pain. Old Harry can't restrain the crazed inmate either. Percy stands there paralyzed like a frightened statue. The chaos only stops when Brutal appears and knocks Wild Bill unconscious. He looks at the man and mutters about how the world produces people like that. Paul sends the injured guards to the doctor and orders the rest to write a report. He stays to watch the mile, although he can barely stand from the pain. John Coffey calls him again. Paul mutters that it's really not a good time, but shuffles over. Suddenly, Coffey grabs him and pulls him against the bars. Dell calls for help, but before anyone acts, Coffey places his enormous hand right over Paul's infected groin. The light bulb in the cell glows brightly and bursts. Coffey lets go and begins to cough violently. A cloud of black dust comes out of his mouth, floats upward, and disappears. Coffee tells Paul he took the pain away and says he is very tired. Completely exhausted, he collapses on the bed and falls asleep. Paul stumbles toward the bathroom in shock and realizes the pain is completely gone. He feels like he has been reborn. That night, Paul and his wife stay together in bed, lost in each other and in memories of their youth. The next morning, Paul takes the day off and visits the lawyer who defended Coffee, but the man says there are no records of Coffee's past. It's as if he fell from the sky. Paul refuses to believe Coffee is a violent man, but the lawyer maintains the conviction, comparing Coffee to a dog his family once adopted, sweet and quiet, until one day he attacked his son without warning and the boy lost an eye. The next day, Paul brings John some cornbread baked by his wife. When Paul asks him if he liked it, John smiles and says she was very pleased. John also shares the bread with Dell and Mr. Jingles. Wild Bill asks for some too, but they ignore him. The inmate starts throwing racial slurs at Coffee, and Paul approaches to shut him up. In response, Bill spits directly in Paul's face. That kind of behavior is nothing new for Wild Bill. He provokes everyone. To shut him up, the guards spray him with a fire hose and throw him into the isolation cell. Bill swears he'll behave, but instead, he buys a pie from the janitor and throws it in Brutal's face. Back to the box he goes. Dell's execution is approaching, but he has no family to say goodbye to. So the guards put on a little performance, pretending to be important circus visitors who came to see the famous performing mouse. Meanwhile, Paul supervises Percy during the execution rehearsal. Everything goes perfectly. Afterward, Percy sees Dell returning happily to his cell and seems ready to make peace. But suddenly, Percy scares Dell as a joke, causing the man to fall and hit his head. Percy laughs, claiming it was just a joke. But while he is distracted, Wild Bill reaches his arm through the bars, grabs Percy, and starts groping him while whispering threats. He lets go just as quickly, but Percy is left trembling. Wharton mocks Percy, comparing him to a girl, while Dell laughs uncontrollably. Percy is so terrified he wets himself. Burning with shame, he begs the others to keep his humiliation a secret. Paul tells him calmly,
What happens on a mile stays on a mile. Always has.
Dell, of course, keeps mocking him anyway. The day of Dell's execution finally arrives, and he is distressed about Mr. Jingles' fate. Paul promises to take care of the mouse himself, but Dell worries that the poor animal will be afraid to live near the forest by Paul's house. That's when Brutal gets creative and invents a place called Mouseville, a big circus tent, with an entire city of mice where they perform for crowds and live in luxury. Dell's eyes light up like a child's at Christmas. He believes every word. To him, Mouseville sounds like paradise. Suddenly, the spool falls and Mr. Jingles runs into the hallway to chase it. To everyone's horror, Percy steps down with his boot and crushes the mouse. Then, without a word, he turns around and walks away. Dell screams with a broken heart, while Coffee quietly approaches and urges them to hurry. Paul gently picks up the mangled body and hands it to Coffee. The giant brings the mouse close and blows on it. A burst of light fills the room, and then, as if nothing happened, Mr. Jingles runs back to Dell, safe and sound. Coffee coughs up another cloud of dark ash. The guards are speechless. Paul and Brutal confront Percy. Paul tells him the mouse is alive and adds that Percy is as bad at killing mice as he is at everything else. Percy is stunned and furious, convinced it's a joke to make him look like a fool. Brutal grabs him again, and Paul makes things clear. Percy will disappear after Dell's execution. If he doesn't, the guards will beat him and testify under oath about every vile thing he has done, including his cowardice. They shake hands, sealing the deal. That night, Dell walks calmly toward his execution. He places Mr. Jingles on Paul's shoulder and asks him to look after his friend. Since the mouse cannot be with Paul during the ceremony, Coffee keeps him, holding the little creature. Dell says goodbye to the little animal, telling him he loves him. As the guards lead him to the chair, Dell loses heart seeing Percy smiling from the side. And in his last words, Dell apologizes for his sins and once again begs Paul not to forget Mr. Jingles. Then, Percy betrays him. He cruelly releases the truth about Mouseville, telling Dell it was just a story made up to keep him quiet.
That's just a fairy tale these guys told you to keep you quiet.
And when it comes time to wet the sponge that would make Dell's death quick and merciful, Percy only pretends to dip it in the water. Paul realizes too late what is happening. Percy gives the signal and pulls the switch. Dell convulses violently in the chair, screaming in agony, while the room fills with a burning stench. At the same time, Coffee starts to convulse in his cell, spiritually absorbing the pain to share Dell's suffering. Wharton, meanwhile, is practically jumping for joy, laughing like a madman. Paul hopes Dell dies fast, but he is wrong. The agony goes on, flames burst from Dell's body. The audience panics, running for the exits. Paul grabs Percy and forces him to look at what he has done. When the screams finally stop, Brutal orders Percy to put out the flames with a fire extinguisher. Later, Percy has the nerve to say he didn't know about the sponge. Brutal has had enough and slaps Percy. Hal appears furious, demanding answers from Paul about the madness that just occurred. But Paul quickly realizes that the most important thing now is to get rid of Percy, and fast. So he covers for him, keeping their deal intact and the exit path open. Afterward, Paul goes to see John, who lies in his cell crying silently. The man says he felt Dell's pain, and that now that it's over, he is very tired. Mr. Jingles, still scared, has gone to hide again in the padded isolation cell, and Coffee curls up to sleep. Over the weekend, Paul and his wife visit Hal and Melinda. Surprisingly, Melinda is in good spirits, although Hal says she sometimes has strange episodes, screaming insults he didn't even know she knew. The next day, Paul invites his fellow guards to lunch and finally shares the story of how John miraculously cured him. How could such a gift be in the hands of a man who killed children? He suggests something completely crazy, taking John Coffey out of prison for one night to help Melinda. The idea leaves everyone stunned. If they get caught, they'll be arrested immediately, not to mention the risk. John is technically a convicted murderer, but Paul, for the first time, says what he truly believes. John is innocent. He is convinced that no murderer or rapist could be blessed with such power. That kind of grace does not come from evil. Eventually, he manages to convince them. On the night of the plan, they knock Wild Bill out with a dose of sedatives strong enough to take down a horse. Then, with much satisfaction, they put Percy in a straitjacket, gag him, and lock him in the padded cell. Paul tells him it's revenge for Dell.
A few hours of quiet time, Percy, so you can reflect on what you did to Dell.
And Percy, still dazed, suspects nothing. Dean stays behind to watch the mile. Being the youngest and having a family to protect, he can't risk being part of the escape. If questioned, he'll say Coffey is still in the isolation cell and the others went out on an errand. Meanwhile, Coffey already knows something is up and is delighted. Just the chance to go for a walk fills him with joy. But as he leaves his cell, Wild Bill lunges and grabs his arm. A flash of panic hits John, and all the light bulbs above explode. Bill falls back unconscious. Outside, under the open sky, John is in wonder. He lifts a handful of grass to his nose, smelling its scent and urging the others to do the same. For a moment, everyone just breathes. The group gets into the truck and heads to Hal's house. Somehow, John already knows what is going to happen. He knows someone needs him. Hal meets them at the door with a shotgun in hand. He thinks it's a breakout or something worse. Paul tries to explain, but Coffey moves forward calmly, sensing exactly where he needs to go. Hal hesitates, shocked by the sight, but finally lets them in. Coffey sits on Melinda's bed. She notices the scars covering his body. It's clear he's been beaten again, and he doesn't even remember his childhood. He introduces himself gently, leaning toward her face. When their lips meet, the lights in the room grow brighter. All the clocks stop. The house shakes as if hit by an earthquake. John absorbs her illness, taking the tumor into his own body and starts to suffocate. But this time, he doesn't release the poison. He holds it in. He refuses help. And then Melinda opens her eyes. She doesn't remember what just happened. She only knows she feels good. She looks around the room, sees John, and introduces herself again.
What's your name?
John Coffey, ma'am.
As if they were meeting for the first time. Melinda tells them she had a dream where she met John in the dark. As a gift, she gives him a St. Christopher pendant, a giant who carried others through hardships, even at the cost of his own life. The guards gently help the exhausted and sick John into the truck. Brutal thinks maybe John held onto Melinda's tumor on purpose, hoping it would kill him before he had to undergo the execution. They return to the prison without incident and put John to bed. Then they take Percy out of the padded cell. He has learned nothing. On the contrary, he is even more bitter than before. As they pass the cells, John suddenly grabs him by the neck and pulls him against the bars. Percy gasps for air, panicking, and just like before, Coffee exhales a thick cloud of gray ash directly onto him. The guards quickly check Percy. He seems fine physically, but his eyes are blank, completely empty. He begins to walk slowly down the mile in a trance. Then, without warning, he turns around, pulls a revolver, and empties the cylinder into Wild Bill. All 6 bullets hit the mark. Percy falls to the ground while another cloud of ash leaves his mouth. Paul, the first to react, runs to Coffee. John tells him he only did what had to be done. He punished evil. When Wild Bill grabbed his arm earlier, he saw it all. Now he wants Paul to see it too. Paul reaches out, and when they touch, he is pulled into the memory. He sees the last day of the girls' lives. The vision is so painful his body shakes, and every light bulb in the block explodes in a violent flash. Wild Bill had been working at the girls' house with their father, even having dinner with the family. That night he returned and took the sisters into the forest. He threatened that if one of them screamed, he would kill the other. They stayed silent. Their love for each other was what finally doomed them. John tells Paul he feels pain like that everywhere, all the time. It never stops, and he can't take it anymore. Later, Hal and the police arrive. Percy doesn't respond at all, staring into space. Hal asks Paul if what happened at his house has anything to do with Bill's death. Paul lies. He knows the truth wouldn't help anyone now. In the end, Percy is finally transferred to the mental hospital, but as a patient, not as staff. Now, Paul faces the one thing he cannot ignore. John Coffey is a good man, a holy man, the last person on earth who deserves to die in the electric chair. Paul has done a lot in his life, but if he allows this to happen, he knows he'll go straight to hell. He talks to his wife about it. She suggests asking John what he wants. Maybe the answer is there. With only 2 days left, Paul visits John. The gentle giant sees the torment in Paul's heart and asks him not to worry. He doesn't want to be free. He's tired of walking this world alone, tired of feeling everyone's pain every day. Death would be a relief. As a last wish, John asks for a slice of that sweet cornbread he remembers and one other thing. He's never seen a movie. The guards are happy to oblige. They take him to the warden's screening room to watch Top Hat, the same movie that made Paul cry in the nursing home. John watches in wonder as the dancers glide across the screen and whispers that they look like angels. Finally, the day of the execution arrives. Paul takes off the pendant Melinda gave John, promising to return it when it's all over. John smiles and tells them he had a dream about Mouseville, where Mr. Jingles did tricks for 2 little girls, alive and happy. When they take him to the execution chamber, John stops. He can feel the hatred of the people in the gallery, especially the grieving parents of the girls. Some even say he should be executed twice just so he suffers more. Brutal tells him softly to focus on the guards, the ones who know the truth and care deeply about him. Dean straps him to the chair with tears rolling down his face. Paul tries to stay strong, keeping his expression cold and professional. While reading the sentence, they place the black hood over John's head, but John pleads. He doesn't want to be left in the dark. He's afraid of it. Paul honors his wish and leaves the hood off, soaking the sponge with water. Everyone in the room waits for the order. Paul hesitates. He cannot speak. Instead, he reaches out and takes John's hand one last time. In his mind, he keeps hearing the same words over and over. They helped kill him. And it happens every day. It's so unfair, so wrong. Finally, Paul gives the command. The execution is quick. There are no screams, only silence and the sound of grown men crying quietly. Afterward, Paul gently replaces the St. Christopher pendant around John's neck. Back to the present, Paul finishes telling the story. That was the last execution he ever supervised. After that, he and Brutal transferred to a youth facility to help guide troubled kids on the right path. Elaine doesn't quite believe everything Paul has told her. After all, he should be much older than he looks. So, Paul takes her for a walk. They arrive at an old cabin in the woods. Inside, tucked into a cigar box, lives an old friend, Mr. Jingles. The same little mouse, still rolling his spool as always. Elaine is stunned. Paul explains that after John's execution, the mouse returned to him. And just like with Paul, John's healing touch passed some of his gift to the little animal. Paul is now 108 years old. He has outlived everyone he has ever known and believes this long life is part of the punishment he received for helping kill a true miracle. Now, he has also had to bury Elaine. Of course, he knows he won't live forever, but he will live long past the point where he is ready to say goodbye.